Let's bring in our panel. Joining me now from Leeds is Saleh. He's a lecturer in Middle East politics at Lancaster University. In Doha, we have Fathollah Nejad. He's a visiting fellow at the Brookings Doha Center. And completing our panel from Los Angeles is Roxana Ganji. She's an Iranian-American activist whose father served as education minister under the last Shah of Iran before the revolution of 1979. I'm going to get into the specifics of the Denmark case in a few moments. But first, I want to ask I want to ask you first about Trump reimposing sanctions and whether it complicates Iran's relationship with the Europeans. What do you think?
Well, first of all, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. President Trump on Monday put all its political pressure, economic pressure to destroy the Iran economy and also to force Tehran to renegotiate its nuclear deal. So they better win. Otherwise, that would immune Iran and somehow strengthen Iran's position in terms of its political and economic and security position at the moment in a very, very fragile Middle East. So this is particularly important since there are very few options open to the United States apart from economic pressure to deal with Tehran or to force Tehran to renegotiate its security policies and of course, its nuclear ambitions. So this is what Europe and your European Union and other great powers such as China, Russia, plays a role at this very, very important historical moment is to keep this nuclear accord alive. And this is particularly again important since United States has never been marginalized and isolated and has never been delegitimized in its security policies in the Middle East, and particularly when it comes to Iran.
Okay, let me bring in Roxana Ganji. So, Saleh says, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So by the US trying to penalize those who purchase Iranian oil, by penalizing some Iranian leadership and banks and ships and aircraft and so on, the US is not isolating Iran. The US is actually isolating itself, and there might be an opportunity for the Europeans and others. Do you see it that way, Roxana?
Unfortunately, for the past 40 years, what's been missing in this big equation is the people of Iran and the grassroots movements in Iran. That, they've been over and over trying to show the world that they're against this regime. They've tried everything from the reform movement to moderates, hardliners, everything. Unfortunately, that's in this equation, the people of Iran have been totally looked over. And the Europeans, especially because of economic gains, have all over these years chosen to deal with a rogue regime, empower these ayatollahs in Iran to do whatever they want with their own people for the few dollars that the Europeans are making. I think it's time now, and I think President Trump's on the right track. The regime in Iran can't continue to treat the people in Iran like this.
Okay.
People over the past 40 years have had it.
Okay.
So I think that the Europeans only have to stand with the world.
Okay. So okay, this is interesting, right? And we're going to, and as I said, in a few minutes, we'll look at what the Europeans are trying to do with regards to a separate incident in Denmark. But staying on this topic for the moment, Ali, does Roxana make a good point that by the Europeans tripling their business ties with the Iranians over the past few years since the nuclear deal was signed, and I understand it goes from $7 billion or euros to over 21 billion euros. We haven't actually seen that money improve the lives of the Iranian people. It's just lining the pockets of the Iranian government. And so is Trump right? And are the Europeans wrong for being disappointed that Trump has reimposed those sanctions?
Well, to put it that way, what we've seen over the last few years since the conclusion of the Iran nuclear agreement has been a tendency of glorification by the Europeans vis-à-vis Tehran when it comes to its domestic politics, but also its regional policies. Whereas with the Bush administration, we've seen a return of demonizing Iran like we had during the Bush-Cheney era. So both readings are inadequate. When it comes to the business dealings that were struck after the deal, we see that over 80% went to semi-state and state entities in Iran, and there has been hardly a trickling down process onto normal Iranians. So that the economic growth figures that we've seen were against the backdrop of the revitalization of oil exports. And this economic growth has not been inclusive, so that average Iranians did hardly benefit.
Ali, I want to ask you about some of the U.S. reasons for imposing the sanctions. Among other things, Tehran has to stop its missile program, end support to Middle East terrorist groups. There's some quoting the U.S. State Department, including Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So is that, I mean, on a scale of 0 to 100, is that ever likely? Is that 0?
Well, it's probably not 0, but it's closer to 0 than to 100. So basically, what we have in the United States, in the White House, is not also a clear line. But at the end of the day, this maximum pressure strategy exerted upon Iran with the reimposition of comprehensive economic sanctions, crippling ones, has been designed, as it is said in the White House, to change Iran's mostly regional behavior. And it is quite unlikely that Iran going to succumb to those 12 demands put forward by the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. But what is certain is that the economic problems in Iran will be exacerbated by this reimposition of sanctions, whose fallout has already been felt in Iran during the last few months. So it's not actually breaking news, because we've already seen the consequences of the sanctions, with European companies retreating from the Iranian market. So in how far this will lead to Iranian behavioral change remains to be seen. But what the new situation in Iran is a growing discontent, by large sections of the society vis-a-vis the establishment, so that economic and political pressure will indeed be heightened.
Right. So, Roxana Ganji, you're saying that the Iranian people are left out of this equation. If by supporting President Trump, you're also supporting the sanctions, and therefore you're also supporting the tightening of the belts of the Iranian people, as Ali says, the economic problems are going to be exacerbated. So aren't the people going to be hurt by this?
Well, the people of Iran have been hurting for 40 years, and every year it's getting worse and worse. It doesn't matter which administration has been there. At one point in 2009, during the Green Movement, the people of Iran were on the streets chanting, "Obama, are you with them or with us?" They are tired of this situation. It's got nothing to do with the Trump sanction. It's got nothing to do with what Bush did. It's got nothing to do with what President Obama did. The people of Iran have had it with this regime. No matter what, at one point, and they've started their homegrown grassroots movements. So by supporting the people of Iran, they don't want this regime. It's very clear today that they have tried everything with this regime. They voted, they backed on Rouhani, they backed on Mousavi and Karoubi during the Green Movement. Nothing has changed the situation of the average Iranian on the streets. So I truly believe that the sanctions are hurting, but I think that people inside Iran are willing to take that.
Okay.
If it's not gonna be something, if we're not working towards another negotiation at the table with the Ayatollahs, which won't change anything. If it's gonna help them actually change this regime, have free elections, be monitored, internationally monitored elections, that's what they are rooting for.
Okay, so
and I think if anyone truthfully wants to hear that, they should go on the streets of Iran and talk.
Okay, so let me ask Alim Saleh, is that a fair representation of what might be the case, where some people are willing to take a necessary medicine if it meant changing their government and having more democracy, that they might be supporting the sanctions? What do you think, Alim?
Well, of course, the reimposition of sanctions on Iran, regardless of what we think about the regime in Tehran, is illegal according to international law, according to the United Nations Security Council. It's immoral because indiscriminately it's targeting ordinary people, average people. It makes their life much harder, and that's been said in the International Court of Justice. It's been said by so many human rights organizations and so on. Apart from this, it would never ever meet the objectives that United States claims that they are aiming to achieve, which is reforming or changing Iran's regional behavior and policies. In fact, it would strengthen the position of hardliners in Iran, and it would, of course, convince a large segment of Iranian societies that is Washington to be blamed and not Tehran's policy. So regardless of what Tehran does, the United States would be considered by probably some segments of the people that is hostile, and it's an enemy as Tehran has always been claiming it to be.
Okay, yep. So there is a theory that this would only embolden hardliners. It would put maybe more support behind the leadership. And in terms of the finances and economics, even though Iran is locked out of SWIFT and other financial institutions, it appears the Iranians have options with the Chinese, India, Turkey, and others. We'll have to see how this plays out. Now, there's another interesting thing that complicates the whole situation. And Ali, I'm going to address this to you first. We have the Danes saying that Iran tried to kill a dissident, right? So Swedish police arrested a Norwegian of Iranian descent. This was in Denmark. They say they were trying to take out a dissident. Now, the Europeans, ironically, even though they were against Trump when it comes to reimposing sanctions, they want tough action against Iran because they firmly believe that Iran's trying to take out dissidents on European soil. Ali, we have the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, saying this is a Zionist plot. Is that nonsense from him?
Well, the investigations on the background of the sad incident are still ongoing, so it's quite early to tell what the real motivations or the real backgrounds of this particular incident have been. And what we hear from the Iranian side is basically blaming the usual suspects. So it's actually too early to say anything more than that. But what is certain is that incident has actually signaled a crackdown within this before mentioned tendency of glorification in Europe vis-a-vis Iran. So there is this increasing criticism vis-a-vis Iranian actions, and this will be debated among the European Union. But that doesn't mean that this is going to be a game changer when it comes to the European Union's willingness to try to continue to engage in trade and rapprochement with Iran. So this won't be a game changer, but this will be a kind of temporary wake-up call. But this incident has been overshadowed by the Jamal Khashoggi murder. Otherwise, this incident would have been probably played a much more prominent role in Europe itself.
Okay, so Roxana, we have this happening in Scandinavia. In June, there was news in Paris, the accusations from multiple European countries that the Iranians tried to blow up an opposition protest rally. So the accusation is Iran wants to act above the law on European soil and murder dissidents. Would the Trump administration be right in thinking, you Europeans must be absolutely crazy, why won't you support our sanctions when the Iranians want to do this sort of thing on your soil?
Well, this issue is very close to my heart. I'm going to show you this poster, which is about 20 years old. This is just a number of people that were assassinated outside of Iran. It started with Tabatabai in Washington, D.C. Then we had the murders of Shahryar Shafiq and Ovaisis in Paris. Dr. Cyrus Elahi, which was a very close associate of my father. Dr. Reza Mazlouman, the same. Farrukhzad. We had the Mykonos. We had the Prime Minister Shapur Bakhtiar in Paris. So this is not a new thing. There has been number of assassinations, a large number of assassinations outside of Iran. Well, it's been curbed because they were trying to sit at the table and they strike a deal which only benefits the Ayatollahs and their immediate family and the clique in Iran, not the people of Iran. So this assassination plot, if anybody's going to undermine what the Islamic Republic can do outside of Iran, you have to go and study the assassinations that have taken place. In Turkey, we had one of my father's close associates assassinated, Abbas Gholizadeh, who was found months later in the water. His remains were found later. So this has taken place all over the world by this government. and it's nothing new. So don't undermine it. I think, the world has to finally realize the true nature of this regime, and that this regime will never change. It was based on the export of the revolution, and that's what they've been trying to do. And unfortunately, successful so far, they've done it in a lot of places.
So, Alim Saleh, as we circle back to the beginning and we tie the two issues here, again, what's in it for the Europeans is their relationship with the Iranians. If they're that convinced, right? We saw the Nordic countries come together and say we're convinced that the Iranians were behind this, even though they're still allowing this to go through due process. They seem to be as confident that the Iranians were behind this plot as, say, Turkey is that the Saudis murdered Jamal Khashoggi, at least until the Saudis actually admitted that they did, right? So what's in it for the Europeans? They can be sure that this is happening, but they're still trying to kind of balance the relationships between not reimposing sanctions, still keeping business open. What's going on there?
Well, interestingly, it took Ankara at least 1 month, despite all the objective evidences, to officially blame or actually condemn Saudi Arabia or Riyadh on Jamal Khashoggi's case. But interestingly, in this particular case, the Danish case, we see only hours before the alleged plot, we see that Washington, Tel Aviv, and Riyadh condemned it and politicized it and securitized the issue for their own political ends. That doesn't necessarily mean Iran has never done this before. Of course they did, and they do, and they may do again. But as just Ali said, we really need to wait to see that how legal procedures would take place. This is particularly important since a few weeks ago, 2 other people have been arrested for the same reason in Denmark, but they have been released hours after their arrest and without any charge. So we really need to know whether what other mechanisms are playing a role in this very important, but sad and, however, very politicized and securitized issue. This is particularly important since Mossad claims that they have played a role in founding or unfolding this plot.
Mossad,
so for Mossad Europe,
claimed,
however...
Hold on, sorry. Mossad claimed what? I don't understand.
Claim that they have helped the Danish intelligence services to unfold or to uncover this plot.
Right.
But this is what Jerusalem Post has claimed. But for Europe, Iran is not only an economic issue; it's also a security issue. It's a political issue. The recent reimposition of sanctions on Iran and President Trump's walking away from the nuclear deal is humiliating Europe. It's more about a European dignity, political dignity, and independence to take this great opportunity to once and forever get rid of this Americans' hegemony and arrogant policies everywhere, internationally. So this is particular for Europe. Since Europe will be paying the price if Iran goes wild and goes against this, it becomes more aggressive, not achieving its goals and the aftermath of the nuclear deal.
Okay, so we're going to keep a close eye
particularly since...
Okay, Ali, Alim, I have to move on, but we're going to keep a close eye on the sanctions. Okay. What sort of repercussions they have on the Iranian people and on the government. And we're also going to look at the relationship between the US and Iran, the Europeans and Iran. And we're going to wait for a verdict on the issue in Denmark as well. But for the moment, I have to move on. Alim Saleh, Ali Fathollah Nejad, and Roxana Ganji, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
Thank you for having me.